6:30 may be understood as a Zoom room opening time, and thus we may have a few stragglers between now and 6:35. So we're just going to give one last stretch of time for anybody that may refer to, and then we'll move on to formal introductions and some panel discussion after that. So hang tight just a little bit longer now. Event. We will remain with our cameras on for ease of conversation, but we would ask all participants for the time being, at least until Q&A, to turn video off and to remain muted. After which, feel free to turn video on and unmute and ask things in the more Q&A side of things. But now that we're all here, I'd like to start with just a few introductions. I'll start with myself and representatives of Capital, and then we'll have our iDebate representative panelists tonight is, as I just mentioned, Nolan McClung, who is our debate team co-captain and debate union vice president, along with the two of us here in our debate room. We also have joining us virtually debate union members Jack Blosser and Ryan Crowley, who have been very instrumental in helping to put this event and organize this, put it together. As you will most likely hear from later, our debate coach is also joining us tonight, Dr. Stephen Coach, who we affectionately know as Coach, and we refer to many situations, will also be joining us tonight, and as well as all of the Capital students that are joining us and await the discussion. So without further ado, we'll have representatives from iDebate introduce themselves in whatever order they see fit before we begin the discussion.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Victor. I've been in iDebate for, I think, roughly 8 years now, something along those lines. I am currently a college student in California, and I think that's pretty much enough for a basic introduction. Hand it off.
I can go next. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. I'm Manzi. I'm one of the. I joined iDebate in 2014, so I guess it's like 7 years. So Victor's like 6. I'm also a college student. I'm in New Hampshire as well. Yeah. What else? I study computer science. I'm a senior. I'm about to graduate, which is great. Yeah, that's all.
I guess it's my turn. My name is Miza Loan. I have been in iDebate for, I'll say, 3-4 years. And I'm also a college student in Utah. And I guess that's it. Yeah.
All right. And we're super grateful for all three of your attendance here at our event this evening, or for some of us this morning. But as we get into our questions, I'll be the first interviewer, let's say. And so I was so caught up in the zeal of getting the event up and rolling that I forgot my first question actually incorporated an introduction. But the second half of the question, I guess in the same order that we just introduced ourselves, I would like to start the discussion with what created each of your personal interests in public debate or civil engagement as a whole? What really sparked that fire for each of you?
I think what sparked the fire, I think, was like probably after my first year of debating, debating against so many different people back home, sort of gave value to the concept of debating or getting involved with people or civic engagement. Because at first I joined debate as a club from genuine interest, and it didn't mean much. But once I started talking to people and I felt, I guess, my ideas changing or my values changing, I felt like it meant something and it was necessary for me to do so from that point onwards in different realms of civic engagement. So, yeah.
I think I started off enjoying debate basically because it was competitive. Like I enjoyed arguing with the people. I enjoyed feeling like I could win. I've always been argumentative, and now I had like a tool that I could use to beat people, and then, or at least like to feel that I beat people. And then eventually, it became more when I realized that like there wasn't really any point. It wasn't about beating people. It was actually you could use debate to try and express yourself and to like relate properly with people, which is really what I learned partially through iDebate and through things like the US tour. So I won the US tour in 2014. Yeah, so that's kind of when I saw the other ways that you can use debate and the ways that iDebate is trying to use debate. Yeah.
I will be honest, I first joined debate because it was like a trend and all of my friends were joining debate too. So I just joined the debate club at my former school because it was a trend. Then when I started debating and I was told I was good at it, so I was like, you know what, I'm just going to continue it. So yeah.
All right. Thank you. Just getting those different perspectives on what really drew you to the activity and also the utility of it. That's interesting too. Um, and just as a note for these future questions, especially as we get into the main discussion, interplay between different speakers is totally expected and cool and encouraged. We don't have to keep up the formality of one at a time. Feel free to unmute among the presenters, obviously, to add input to each other's answers and so on and so forth. So my next question of introductory nature, iDebate Rwanda, from my understanding, typically tours in person with the goal of, as the communications officer who I corresponded with, Cynthia, put it, promote civil discourse and engagement. Kind of I guess, so my question is like, put that into your own words and sort of describe why that is, like why the focus on civil discourse and engagement. What does that practically look like, and why is that a goal of iDebate Rwanda?
I think of it as building confidence in believing what you think as a person, as an individual. And I think like, especially targeting younger people in high school or whatnot, and trying to build that confidence from there is sort of like a gateway of, put it in my own words, I'd say, it's like telling a kid, oh, you have the power to think, you can think specific things, and not everything that you think is, should be thrown out the window because you're a kid or whatnot, but you can, have an impact or engage in structured thought and whatnot with other people. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also it's like, if you, even going beyond that, if you teach people and give people the power, like Victor says, to like think in the way that you think is meaningful or powerful, you create like a more informed people about things that you think matter. So that's why iDebate tours to teach people about like, about like what happened in Rwanda, about how you can be creative, about how you can even apply to colleges and things like that. basically so that they can create awareness for things that they think matter.
I can say also as a girl, I think having this platform where you have like 5 minutes, let's say if your speech is going to be 5 minute debate, like 5 minutes where everybody's paying attention to you and listening to you. I don't think there's any other space in this world that could give you that opportunity, if I may say. So I think they they give that platform to me as a girl, as a woman, and I think it's an opportunity for us to be heard, because we're not often heard, and yeah.
Right. There's power in that. It's empowering.
Yes.
Right. And there's also the awareness that comes from that, as Manzi touched on. So yes. Speaking also of the awareness that comes about from participating in the activity and what happened in Rwanda, I'm going to be putting speakers on the spot here just a little bit, but I'm asking in your words, please describe the impacts that the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, like what impacts that continues to have at any level that you've observed or that you've heard about, or just speaking to that event, what impacts does it still have?
um, I will say that I think it puts pressure on us as the younger generation, because um, this genocide killed over 1 million Tutsis. So we are the ones that are going to make sure it doesn't happen again. And so I think it puts pressure on us, but in a good way, that we are the ones that are to make sure that this won't happen again, if I may say. So I think the impact that it still has on us is as thinking of the way we act, how we do things in in this world, and basically making sure that it doesn't happen again. Yeah.
It's also kind of odd because like 60% of Rwanda wasn't even alive when the genocide happened. Like I think 60% of us are under 25. And so to most of us, like, yeah, some people were alive when there was like wars and other things like that. But for most of us, the genocide is kind of something that we heard about from stories that we see from like missing family members, or like people in prison. Like it's not really something that we experienced, yet it's something that really defines the country. So I think you could say, especially because the people who are in power are people who are older than 25 for the most part, right? So I think it's I'm not saying that the impacts that the genocide continues to have, they're not really directly on majority of the country, so much as the psyche of the country, so much as the way that we remember the country, the way that we think about the country. But also like 40% of the country was literally alive and was literally there. Yeah. I'm not really sure what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I think adding on to that, I think growing up, it very much felt like entrenched and as a personal story. Very much felt very close to I'll speak for myself. Very much felt very close to me, even though I perhaps didn't know any of family members that might have died at that period of time. But as Manzi had mentioned, it really defines a lot of what like makes Rwanda today, or the reasons why we do things, or that the country does things a certain way. So it's very much a psychological battle. Let's say you could consider it issues of generational trauma, and the 40% that Manzi was talking about, that were present and that are still going through trauma, especially in this period of time, around this time of year. Yeah.
Right. And speaking to the psychological aspect, it's also just the perceptions of the outside world, as we've already learned, 40% being alive during the events thereof. Despite that, 100% to put a point on it, have to like be aware of it and have a working knowledge of it. It's almost expected from other countries. Like, could we speak anything to that at all? Like the experiences surrounding that, or?
Sorry, I wasn't clear what your question was. Could you repeat that again?
Oh, just a prompt along the lines of like, as you were the one to introduce the statistic of like 60% of Rwanda like was born after this event transpired. And despite that, there's almost like this understanding from the global community, especially in developed areas, to just stand here and say, "Oh, well, you must know all about it." Kind of the frame. I'm kind of coming after the framing of my own question, but almost just like this expectation that despite 60% of the population not being on Earth at the time of the event, 100% is expected to know all about it. Like, what say you to that? Like, have you experienced that?
Yeah, I think it's honestly, I think it's probably your best bet is probably if you were to pick a random Rwandan, they would know a lot about the genocide. Like, it's something that we learn about quite a bit. It's something that's really, like I said, entrenched in almost every part, I think, of like almost every Rwandan definitely has a working knowledge of what happened, why it happened. Maybe some people have different versions of history, but we all have something that we believe, right? Yeah, so I definitely think it's something that Rwandans know. I think it's probably unfair for people to assume that on average that everyone's going to know everything about one thing. But I think if you were to ask me, for example, tell me about this thing, I would gladly tell you about history and tell you about the things that I know about the Rwandan genocide. And I think probably most Rwandans are the same way, kind of because we want to tell the story, maybe because it kind of, if it's something that you think about frequently enough, you want to talk about it. And if you know a lot about it, then it's nice to kind of get it off your mind. I don't know. Yeah. I think most Rwandans would like to share about it.
Kind of adding on to that, I think especially very recently, a lot of people have been much more, let's say, outspoken about their versions of history. And this sort of movement of having to talk about things or spread the knowledge about the history of the genocide has been, I think, kind of prevalent. Like there's been, I think very recently, like a podcast about the genocide has been started by the organization in charge of it in the country and whatnot. So it's like, I feel like more and more people are brought to understand that, you have to talk about it and whatnot. But whether it is expected for everybody to know everything there is to know about the genocide is a bit extreme. But in some sense, yes, it happens quite often that I'm expected to know what a genocide is, what happened and whatnot. And if I don't know something, it's frowned upon or things like that. But for the most part, I think I would agree with Brian in saying that, like, you'd find like an average Rwandan would know more about the genocide than an average person, let's say. Yeah.
And maybe to add on what they said is, I also believe that the reason why we, like almost everyone that knows at least what went on and why it happened, is because of the fact that I guess for a long time people are denying that this genocide actually happened, and us knowing means that if somebody is denying it, then you have the ability to say, no, actually, this is what happens, this is how it happened. And of course, some people may say, well, how do you know you're the one that's right? That's still a question that I don't understand, but I think most of it all is that we know it, even though we weren't there, because most people are trying to deny it or name it something that it's not. So the reason why we know is just that in case you have to correct somebody if they said it wrong. So, yeah.
Right, right. Good insights from all on that one. I was just my train of thought left me. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over the interviewer's spot to Jack Blosser, another member of our debate union, and he'll continue the discussion.
All right. So with the genocide's 27th anniversary having just passed this past Wednesday, how would you describe the global perceptions of the events? Have they changed much?
I think it goes back to what I was saying, that some people denying it, but I feel like people have no more knowledge about it now. I think because the more we spread the word, the more we say what actually happened, then it means that more people know what actually happened. So I would say that overall, they know better, if I may say. I'm not too sure, but I feel like they know better than a few years back when when most people outside our country mostly were denying that this genocide actually happened.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's really changed is everyone in the world is kind of starting to understand the role that the world played in the genocide. Like, just after genocide happened, people kind of said, "Yeah, these Rwandans went crazy," right? Like, nobody really understands what's happened in that country. And then eventually, the world realized, like, oh, France was in huge partnership with this government. What was going on there? And France recently accepted that it was complicit in the genocide. Oh, China shipped 300,000 machetes there in a period of like 3 weeks. Like, what was going on there? Like, everybody's kind of realizing the roles that each other played, and that the global economy, the global political system contributed to having these many people get killed. So I wouldn't say that they've changed so much as become a bit more nuanced. People understand that it wasn't just, yes, it was a crazy occurrence that happened, but it's also not just a crazy occurrence, it's an occurrence that can happen anywhere else in the world again, if given the same political and the same social issues, right? Which means that we should prevent it by looking for the same thing in the future.
Also, like, I tend to feel kind of reserved when it comes to thinking that people have changed, or that the global perception has changed, because at the same time, you have different versions of history that keep popping up and that keep being defended from different people from all over the world. And to be honest, it feels like some people might, or some countries might, incriminate themselves by pertaining to, let's say, the Rwandese version of, or the Rwandan government's version of describing the events, versus what other people on certain radio stations, let's say, or have to say about about what happened. But I do think that this movement of genocide prevention in general, or like being more aware of what caused the genocide and how we can prevent it in the future, is definitely more let's say, prevalent in the current society.
Yeah, that's good to understand. Going off of Victor's answer, do you think that civic engagements, sort of like the kind we're having now, represents more of a preventative measure to lower the probability of future violence, or as a healing solution to this recent history?
I tend to believe there's a bit of both. I'd say mostly, first thought would definitely be like the preventative measure, because the first thing that, I mean, we've talked about this in the last couple of questions, but what you want to do is make sure that the history that you know and understand is passed on, and it's strengthened through argumentation and through backing up and whatnot. but I think that's also an integral part of like the healing process. Whereas, you know, an integral part of it being like the truth being brought out into the world and being respected and being accepted and being a gateway to justice. I think that's definitely important. And I think a clear example of that is, for example, people, let's say genocide deniers, coming up around this period of time where people are going through like traumatic experiences and grieving and remembering, and how much of an impact that has on people, especially in this time period.
I think too that civic engagement is a preventive measure, because civic engagement is, I feel like, is a way where people can get to voice out their thoughts, and based off of that, you can, how can I say it? It's like everybody will there's respect for the differences that you have, if that makes sense. It means that civic engagement is a platform where you can argue, but it does not result to violence, but rather understanding each other's differences, if that makes a sense. If that makes a sense. So, which is why I think it's a preventive measure, because then it says that instead of us killing each other, let's rather talk it through, and which is why I think it's a preventive measure. If that makes sense, yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, people talking is good. If people if people talk and then they communicate and they argue with each other and they have systems of resolving disagreements with each other, that's useful for society, right? And if they don't have ways for them to do that, then eventually they're going to, hopefully not, but eventually they might find like other ways that they can express themselves. So yeah, I think definitely civic engagement is a preventative measure for preventing violence everywhere in the world. And then also, I definitely think it also contributes to helping to heal the country, because when people are able to talk to each other, so I think it's both. Like, when people are able to talk to each other, they're able to agree on what the causes of things was. And they can like acknowledge the trauma that was passed down to them, the trauma that they personally fighting with. So yeah, it's definitely both a healing solution for people to slowly become better, but it's also preventing violence. And I'd even say it's like resolving disputes, right? Like, it's not just preventing violence, it's not just helping people heal, it's like, it's resolving disputes just so that there's like normal ways for people to live normal lives. Yeah. And be politically involved. Yeah.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely. What role has public discourse played in the politics of a post-genocide Rwanda?
Do you want to repeat that question for me, because I just want to make sure I understood it?
Oh yeah. So, what role has discourse, as in discussions and debates, all around? What has that done in terms of the political side of Rwanda after the genocide?
I will say personally that I guess with debate, I learned more, if that makes sense, because if I hadn't gone to debate, if I hadn't been part of I Debate Rwanda and things like the U.S. tour, I don't think I would have taken time to know about the politics of my country. I feel like debate made me understand more on a deeper level, how, I guess, how it works, if that makes sense. Because I think How can I say it? I think politics is a very complicated concept, if I may say. There's a person that's perfectly good or perfectly bad. I feel like it's a mix of both. And with debate and with civic engagement, I feel like then you understand more about it. You understand more of the fact that it's not this perfect world where it's either white or black, but a mix of both, if that makes sense.
Yeah, adding on to that, I think definitely public discourse, it's strange, like there's a million ways, like my imagination of what you mean by public discourse is basically the ways that people are able to like discuss with each other in publicly, right? So one example of that, immediately after the genocide, we had the Gacaca courts, which you guys have probably heard about, but it was the way that they kind of resolved, because there was the courts were packed, there was no way for them to try, or all the people who were accused of the genocide, who were accused of killing people during the genocide, they tried people kind of publicly in these outside, like, yeah, very big trials, right? Or like very many trials across the country. So that's one example of how we had public discourse. There was like, even like politically, there's, okay, I don't know. I've never gone to them, but my mom was one of the advisors for a mayor in Kicukiro, and they say that they have meetings and they have like lively and public debate and people can go there and talk. So like throughout the country, you can see like small examples of public discourse, at least informing the way that politics runs, informing the way the legal system runs. And then there's also things like I Debate Rwanda. There's other debate clubs and other like institutions trying to get people talking. And I think they're really powerful. So like even though it's not really so much politically inclined, it's more about like trying to teach people how to think. There's other things like Never Again, which I think Jean-Michel was part of before he started I Debate Rwanda. But they're not as cool as that. Yeah, anyway, that's all.
Yeah, I think in terms of like debate or like the debate we've been talking about this entire time, like the high school debates and whatnot, I think that's a really fresh idea back home. So if there are any effects that we'll be able to identify that they have on politics in the country, I think it will take a couple of years before we can see any of that. But definitely, like I think a back and forth between like institutional bodies, like government bodies and the people, definitely plays a huge role in how decisions are made. There's a huge emphasis on feedback, acquiring feedback from people in like different levels of government. And there's like these big, I think Brian might have referred to them, but there's these big like get-togethers where you have people in the government that are in charge of a certain region that just go there and ask people to tell them what is wrong with them, or what is wrong, not wrong with them, but like wrong, what's going on in their lives, and is there anything that they need, or things like that. So this kind of back and forth and exchange definitely takes place. And I think is one of the reasons why the country is able to target specific problems in the country and solve them, and we're able to move forward and whatnot. So.
Yeah, I definitely think debate is a very good motivating factor for this kind of public engagement and understanding.
Sorry, I was going to add one thing. I think the reason that we have to have these kinds of things is partially because we, like many, I think, sub-Saharan African countries, we have like a tendency to be very respectful of like authority. So the reason that we need to have these systems of like trying to teach people to be argumentative and to be able to see peaceful ways for them to resolve disputes is because there is already like the current pushback, or like the cultural pushback is probably to be like, for example, when people relate to their fathers and their mothers back home, it's to be very respectful. So it's kind of the things that I Debate is doing, trying to encourage people to like be argumentative and to think about things more critically, and to have this public discourse where you question people publicly, and the things that the government's doing, try to get people to be able to go and ask their leaders, why are you doing this? It is because the culture isn't to be that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really getting into what the motivating factors are to this kind of public engagement. So the French president Macron appointed a team of researchers and historians to gather like a deeper understanding of France's role in the 1994 massacres. Do you think anything important has come from this? Was this the result of political discourse?
I will be very honest on this. First, I think yes, public discourse in a way was something that might have pushed them to have this research group doing it, but I still feel like I don't understand what they mean by deeper understanding. I think the knowledge is there of the of the of the participation that France had in this, and I just feel like I think what's making them not fully acknowledge what happened is the accountability. So being accountable for having taken part in a genocide that killed over 1 million people, I think is what's missing. So the deeper knowledge, I kind of don't understand what's the goal, because most people know the part that France had in the genocide. When I say most people, I think most people in my country. And so I kind of don't understand what they mean by deeper knowledge. And I just feel like it's more of a problem of accountability on their part. Yeah.
Yeah, I think because the French involvement in the genocide against the Tutsi was explicitly documented. The documents were there and whatnot, and it's more of a question of like them, as Loan has been saying, like them acknowledging that fact. However, like personally, I don't feel any form of relief. I didn't really feel any form of relief after hearing that announcement, because although that is very different coming from the government of France and whatnot, we know that there aren't really going to be any let's say repercussions, at least at this time. And whether this was a result of civil or public discourse, I definitely think that it was like this idea of never again, and this constant pressure that is put out there of French and other countries' involvement and their need to acknowledge what their past governments have done. Definitely coincides with public discourse and whatnot. The fact that people are talking about this and they're outspoken about it. I don't think it's the only thing that played into that, but definitely, I think we could do much more if let's say we were even more outspoken and whatnot, or we were brutally honest and our words, let's say, had more impact or whatnot. But yes.
Yeah, but one thing that I think frustrated me about the whole report was, or at least the way that people reported about it, was instead of most of the way that people reported about it was like France not complicit in the Rwandan genocide, and things like what was it? France turned a blind eye, things like that, right? Like talking about as if France kind of just made an oopsie, a big slip of its finger. Yeah, but like you don't fall into genocide, like you plan it, you support it. I've never fallen into genocide, right? I've been alive for a while. So yeah, I think it's kind of silly the way that they're suddenly now acknowledging what they did. And I definitely think it was a result of the pressure that people put on France. It's because of the way that people have been talking about the terrible aspects of France's colonial history, and the consequences that it had on Africa. So yeah, I think public discourse and people putting pressure on the countries to acknowledge their past is definitely really beneficial. And you're seeing the same things here in the US as well, like people acknowledging the US's racist history, the US's genocidal history, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good perspective. Now I'm going to hand it off to a member of the Capitol Debate Union, Ryan Crowley.
Okay, so my first question is, what are the most important lessons that other countries can learn from the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda?
First thing that comes to mind is definitely the fact that this can and has happened elsewhere. So nobody's really shielded from something like an organized bloodsheds like the genocide or the likes. I think it's very clear that at multiple periods of time in history, this could have been stopped by many people, by many organizations, by many institutions and whatnot. So I think the most important lesson to be learned is to be on the lookout constantly. And that does mean, that doesn't mean today and tomorrow as well, with things happening like in China and whatnot, in other places. So being able to be, let's say, active bystanders and not passively, let's say, condemning the past and not taking active, let's say, responsibility as global citizens or from wherever you are to make sure that this type of event doesn't happen anywhere else.
Yeah, I think the same. I think that the biggest lesson that other people could learn is that this could definitely happen in your country, because there's nothing special about Rwanda or any other country that has gone through the genocide that makes it that it's only that country and no other country. And that's why we should have things like public discourse, because then instead of resorting to violence, we would rather engage with each other. I don't know if they say this, but they say that something along the lines that we hate each other because we don't know each other, and we don't know each other because we don't engage. And so basically that we should engage rather than resorting to violence. And that because this could happen to you, I think we should do anything in our power for it to not happen.
Yeah, I think another thing that people need to remember is that people always need to have the right to be able to speak their mind and be able to have their opinions like be represented fairly by the world around them. Like, I think one big problem is that it doesn't really make much sense that Rwandans were able to get, that like 1 million Rwandans were able to get killed and people outside in the world weren't paying attention enough to understand what was happening. So it's like important that we never allow the world to get to a state where that kind of thing is possible again, that people just ignore each other from across the world. And then, I was thinking something. Yeah, and then also it's important that people are, that people basically support each other. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Definitely.
Oh, if I could add something, I think it's also important to look at how, let's say, the measures that are taken, not because they're, let's say, 100% bulletproof or, I don't know, God sent or anything like that, but the ways in which, let's say, Rwanda is trying to rebuild itself. Because the ways in which Rwanda is trying to rebuild or has been trying to rebuild itself could be instrumental in other forms of conflict resolution in general, not necessarily specific to genocide, but to other things. How to rebuild yourself using, let's say, your own cultural values as a model. and not necessarily trying to employ other countries' methods that might or might not work in your own country, or other such measures like judicial in judicial terms, or even in economic terms, or those decisions. Evaluate whether those decisions were, let's say, would be applicable in your sense, and use that to move forward as people. Yeah.
I think you all did a great job at outlining that, and it's important for us to realize that we need to have the ability to discuss things, raise awareness, and talk about them rather than strictly focusing on violence or, just not having any type of awareness or knowledge about it. So moving on to my second question, do you think there's a step-by-step process for creating civic institutions that other nations can construct to involve more youth?
I don't think there's like a step by step. I think that maybe basically providing a space where they can voice their thoughts. So most people our age don't speak or don't say what they think because they think it's either I think all of us are probably on Twitter or anything how you're going to be canceled because of something you said. And so most people, we don't speak out because you're afraid you're going to be canceled, or you're afraid that what you're saying is not true. So providing that space where it's more of you speaking out, rather it's more encouraging of you to speak out, like doesn't matter what you say, but that you speak out. And instead of people laughing at you or making fun of you because you said the wrong thing, they encourage you to say something better. So basically providing a space that's safe enough for people to feel like they can voice out their thoughts. And then from then, that's when, debate could come, arguing about different subjects and things like that. But the first and the only step that I think that there is to providing civic engagement is a space where people are free to say what is in their minds.
I definitely say it probably should be fun. Yeah, like I think the reason that most of us stuck with iDebate, like debate is awesome, but it's also a lot of work. And so and it's even more work to run a debate club. I never actually ran the debate club, but like Loan and Jean-Michel did, and I saw them, like the amount of work they were putting in was crazy. So yeah, so it's definitely a lot of work for you, but you also definitely have to it's going to be a lot of work for the students. So you have to make sure that it's rewarding, that it's enjoyable for the people that you're trying to teach these things to. And then, yeah, sorry, I just wanted to have like context. Are you guys trying to start some kind of civic institutions, or are you saying like in general, what was the motivation for the question?
I think it was just more of a in general question to try and get a better understanding to see if there's going to be kind of a by the book way of giving a space for civic discourse, and so I think we just wanted your take on that to see kind of if you guys have thought about that, but it is more just of a general question. We don't have anything currently in the works, but that doesn't mean we won't have anything for the future.
Yeah, I believe, yeah, I don't think there's necessarily a textbook recipe of like how to come up with one. I definitely think you have to have some core ideas that you go by, like let's say the freedom to express yourself as a person, whatever form that may be, whether that be through let's say through text or through word of mouth or anything like that. Although I think the central idea of having a space that is conducive with that idea is probably the biggest idea that I would say for me. Going off of what Brian said of it being fun and more conducive for like the specific population, like the young people, I think as a definite plus. I definitely wouldn't go against it if you're asking me or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We really do need like a spot where people can freely express what's on their mind. And I know Jack can probably expand upon this more if I don't hit it properly. But in our philosophy class, we've been talking about hermeneutical injustice, in which people don't have the language or the proper means to express themselves or kind of what they want to say. So it kind of puts them in a rough situation because they don't have the proper platforms to express or the proper language to truly get people to understand what they're thinking. And I think having a platform like that is going to be a major step in allowing for more understanding. I think understanding everyone is probably the most important thing that we can focus on. And now moving on to my last question. Have you heard of the American film Hotel Rwanda? Okay. So I was just wondering, I mean, not to be insensitive, but how accurate are the events in that movie in relation to the true events that happened?
I can start this question. Well, I think the movie itself in its depiction of like the violence and its depiction of the gore and its depiction of like the terribleness of the genocide, I think it probably doesn't even capture how terrible it was, right? Like, so there you couldn't be insensitive. Like Hotel Rwanda is a movie; it's just depicting a small portion of something that was actually even much worse than that. So yeah, that portion of the movie is one thing. There's the other side of the movie, which is like what it's claiming about the narrative about the hotel itself and the narrative about the person. And that side is a much bigger deal, and I don't want to talk about it. But the question about the politics sorry, not the question about the politics, the question about the story it's telling you about what happened in Rwanda, the bigger narrative it's telling you about what happened in Rwanda, and about how things deteriorated to that level, and about how the government was functioning, about how the people who walked around with the weapons and killed people. That portion of the story, that is at worst, it is probably a dulled down version of what happened. Yeah. Which is terrible, right? Like it kind of makes you imagine what is the degrees to which people can get to which society can get to.
Going off of what Brian was saying, I've never really actually watched the whole movie, but from what I've heard, the people that were depicted in most of the video at that time say that some content of the movie are not lies, if I may say, and there are better movie. I heard about the movie and what the people were saying in Rwanda, and you still get to understand.
Read a book about it or a different source altogether. And I think you must have noticed that there are multiple layers of controversy with the film. I think the most The biggest one is probably the one about, or at least the one I think is the biggest one, is the one about the owner of it, owner/manager of the hotel itself, who is currently undergoing trial back home for the events that transpired during 1994. So the specifics of whether or not the facts that are being presented by one side are correct or not, I think it shouldn't be taken as a source of information in any way. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all the questions I have. Thank you for answering them. So I'm going to hand things off to co-captain Nolan to close things out.
Wait,
Thank you very kindly. So
I want to say something before we close things up. We all kind of said that we thought the Hotel Rwanda didn't really depict what we thought the actual history of what Rwanda was. Places, things that they should read, which would actually be more useful, right? One thing which I read a while back, but which I think a pretty good story from perspective is A Thousand Hills by Stephen Kinzer. I thought that was a pretty good book. What else? I don't know if you guys have any questions.
Well, it's more of a person's story about what they lived through the genocide. It's pretty popular. It's called Left to Tell, and I also there's this other book, but it's in French. I'm not sure if there's an English version of it, but it's called Nous existons encore. It means we still exist. And yeah, I have plenty of recommendation books that you could read about genocide, and anybody that wants, I can just send a list in the chat. Yeah.
yeah, you can absolutely, if you guys want to take a second and write some of these down, you can absolutely send that in the chat so it's a little bit easier for people to look up and find those resources. Thank you guys very much. Did you have any others? I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay. There's one that I've heard of, and apparently is really good. Shake Hands with the Devil, but I'll drop it in the chat as well to make things more accessible.
I think part of the problem, like the reason that things like Hotel Rwanda can't really be enough, or like short movies, is because it's really just depicting the story of one person or two people. So the reason like books, if you really want to understand what was going on in Rwanda, you have to watch, or what happened in Rwanda, you have to watch. You have to read entire books. You have to probably maybe listen to entire books, because that's when you understand the layers and the reasons that the thing happened. When all you understand is a small piece of a story, you probably misunderstand the real story. And that's kind of what happened in Hotel Rwanda.
Thank you all very kindly. That is actually something I was about to ask if you had any recommendations. If anything else comes to your mind, feel free to post that in. It's nice to keep this on hand so we have other resources to look at and learn about this. So I actually wanted to take a second and field any questions from the audience. If anyone has any for the people from I Debate Rwanda, if you have any questions you wish to ask, feel free to use the hand raise function in the chat, or you can send a message to me. Yeah, we would love to hear from anything outside of just the Capitol debate. And if our presenters from I Debate Rwanda have anything they would like to add on to the discussion, you guys feel free to speak up. While waiting for others, I do have one question myself I wish to ask. So you guys talked about how the events of the 1994 genocide were not something you personally experienced, and that so much of the population wasn't there for it. How did it affect your parents and the people most immediately connected to you who were there for it? And we talked about giving you kind of firsthand accounts at all of what it was like. Go.
My my parents were there during the 1994 genocide, and my dad had never actually told me what happened to him. I did know that he he had four other siblings and a mother, and his mom and three of his siblings all died in the genocide. And he had never told me or my mom about any of the events of what happened. But in 2017, that's when he kind of told me. He didn't go into it very much because it's still, I feel like it's a sore subject for him, because every April would be a really sad moment. I feel like every April would be the only time when I would see him, because my dad was very tall, and so what I mean is like it's the only time where you would see my dad not as strong as he makes it seem. And when he did tell me about what happened and to him and his family, it just made me realize how strong he is, because I cannot imagine living what they went through. I cannot imagine being as strong as he was, because all throughout our life, I never saw my dad, having anger issues or something like that, some people may have maybe after such trauma. And when he did tell me what happened to him, it just made me realize how strong he is. And it's not just him, all of these other victims of the genocide just show you how strong they are, because they went through all of these atrocities, but to still be alive and to still, at least at the very least smile, just show how strong they are. Yeah.
My parents weren't in the country during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, but and that was one thing I think that was one of the things I think we mentioned earlier. Like, I don't think my parents ever talked. They never really talked openly about it. It was usually, as Loan mentioned as well, it's like around this time in April, when everybody's remembering or reminiscing, that and mourning, that they would open up at times and talk about their family members. But personally, I don't have that many stories because my parents were not in the country. So leave it at that.
Yeah, I think another kind of odd thing is, at least with my parents is, and I think the same way with Loan's parents, my mom was in the country. Even though she was in the country, she doesn't really openly talk about what her experience was like, or at least she didn't until pretty recent, actually around the same time that your dad opened up to you. So I think you kind of know that there was this big story of something that really impacted your parents and impacted their family and impacted your whole family's lives, but you don't get to understand some of the details about what happened. Maybe, like, oh, this grandma, like, I don't know, like on my mom's side of the family, I know that there's like just chunks of people who are missing, but who there's stories about them. which only happened in the 80s or which only happened in the early 90s. So you kind of fill in the blanks to go, okay, I guess these people probably were killed, but you never really find out. Sometimes you don't really get to know what happened. And even if you do know, it's kind of like, you know that there's trauma, but you don't get to know all the details about that trauma, which is, yeah, kind of the complicated nature of, because people aren't always open and always willing to talk about what happened to them.
Thank you very kindly for sharing those very personal touches of the events. It adds a lot of gravity to hear about how individual people are impacted and how it's impacted their families. I do have a question coming in kind of on the topic of different depictions of the 1994 genocide and how that is perceived by other groups. I got asked, do you think the dramatization in Hotel Rwanda has added to a discussion of the events, or do you think it is almost fueled a lack of discussion? Do you think it was helpful or harmful to discourse?
Okay, I think it's a complicated question, right? Because most Rwandans have good feelings about Hotel Rwanda, right? Like most people feel like it's kind of an oversimplification, and it's kind of weird that this is the biggest story that people in the world know, the story of this one hotel manager, right? Which some people believe it happened. So I think most Rwandans have negative feelings about this movie itself. But on the other hand, I've been in the US for 4 years, and most of the time when people have asked me about the genocide, the launching point has been Hotel Rwanda, right? Like this one movie. So I think it's without a doubt contributed to people having meaningful discourse about the genocide. Sorry, not meaningful discourse. It's without a doubt contributed to people having discourse about the genocide. And sometimes that discourse has been limited. So sometimes that discourse has kind of ended at, whoa, Rwandans are kind of crazy, right? Without getting into the nuance about what actually happened, about why things became that way, and about how that's actually teaching you about society as a whole, right? About how people can evolve. So I think the movie itself, the role it played was really important in getting people to have a conversation and in allowing for things like this, for like a launching point of like, we now have a way that everyone in this room can reference something and reference it with like some meaning of some base where we all understand each other. We wouldn't have that if that movie hadn't been created. I doubt some other movie would have taken its place. It probably would have just been that this story doesn't exist or this story doesn't get told elsewhere. So it's good that the movie told the story to the world. It's not good that that story wasn't told in its entirety. And I hope in the future, I hope that one of these books gets made into a movie, or one of the things that we actually think reflect the story that we think would be more important to tell. It's picked up by someone outside in the world. And until that day, I guess Hotel Rwanda will play the role of having people start.
Yeah, to kind of add on what Brian's saying is that it's true that I have this communications class and we had to do this movie analysis, and the professor was talking about a few examples of movies we could watch and then critique. And then the movie that he suggested was Hotel Rwanda, and you know, because from then I was the teacher did ask me about the movie, and I had to say, well, this movie is said to be based off of lies, so maybe there should be a better suggestion of movies. But the fact that maybe there could have been a better way for me to have an opportunity to talk about the genocide the genocide in Rwanda, but it gave me that opportunity at that moment to actually tell it to the teacher, to the students in my class, that this movie is actually based off of lies, that if you want, movies that truly depict the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, or here are a few suggestions. So I do believe that it did contribute to having this discussion where we can say that this is actually what happened, and this movie is not depicting what actually happened. Yeah.
I feel like when I talk about the movie, the credibility that I have is the sole fact that I'm Rwandan. So whenever I talk about the movie, because I mean, both Luan and Brian mentioned this, but like people generally, in Rwanda at least, people generally don't think the movie is accurate or have negative perceptions of the movie. So it's like, at least in Rwanda, but elsewhere that is different. There are Rwandans elsewhere that might have different perspectives about the movie itself. And I really think it depends on, like, let's say who a random person that has heard of Hotel Rwanda meets. They'll get like a completely different, either it'll reinforce the idea that they believed or counteract whatever they believed. So in an individual, for myself, I think Hotel Rwanda has kind of started or sparked conversations in Rwanda where you could have disputes and have conversations and whatnot. There who has had the same effect, but has reinforced the ideas of Hotel Rwanda and whatnot. I think it has like sort of cloudy, I think, the conversation of how supposed to go about telling the truth and what should be considered as the truth or the true history. How at the same time, I think, and that might be a bit selfish, but I'll say it anyway. I think what mostly matters is like what Rwandans think. I think the moment like disparities in the way Rwandans think about themselves and their history, that's like where this problem lies. Because only like let's say, it might sound very corny, but only a united Rwanda can actually have an impact on what people think about Rwanda. Otherwise, you can't really control. I think you can't really control how people think of Rwanda and whatnot, or you can't even tell how specific people are going to react and whatnot.
Thank you very kindly. I got sent a question, a handful of questions actually. I'm going to break them down for one at a time from Sandra Allen. The first question he sent in, since the three of you who are representing I Debate Rwanda today all attend call in the US, are there any big differences or similarities between the debate culture in Rwanda, the United States? Be it either the like formal debate culture or even like just public discourse in general that you would see on the news or in media?
It's crazy because last weekend I took part in a debate tournament, and it was my first debate tournament here in the U.S. And the thing that me and my partner were talking about was that the debate society in the U.S. should be more inclusive. And yeah, my coach is in this Zoom day, so shout out to Samuel Allen. um, yeah, so I was saying that part of the what me and my teammate was saying was that there are norms in the debate culture in the U.S. that kind of make it hard for a person that's from the outside. That it feels like for you to actually be part of the debate culture, you have to be like them, if that makes sense. So, for instance, I think that completely weird, and this is not a debate in the U.S. Really not, but the spreading, the talking real fast. So, my first round was just it was weird. Yeah, yeah, it was very weird, and but there are good sides of the debate culture here. For instance, having to be given a topic, but having to have a case that's totally different from the week. So it means that are you are you can talk about literally anything that you feel that you want to. For instance, people that talk about okay, I don't know, people that talk about anything that's not based off of the topic. So going outside the topic and not just debating about what the topic says itself, but rather what's important to you, which is a very cool aspect that I found that was really nice. But yeah,
Almost like kind of critical debate and stuff like that, that looks at maybe assumptions of society within the topic.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I joined the parliamentary debate team here at my school, and it was I think kind of similar actually. So we didn't have like spreading. We talked kind of slow. You'd write like cases, and it was pretty similar to our debate except for some of the rules. I think culturally there was some big differences. So like um, there was iDebate kind of eventually, I guess we were high school and we were young, but iDebate kind of eventually became one big group of people who hung out together. And then whereas the debate circuit here kind of is definitely very splintered and there's a lot more competitiveness. Like people were competitive at iDebate, but people still hung out and got to know each other and became close friends. Whereas in some parts of, or at least some members of the parliamentary debate circuit that I was part of here, would come to the tournament, argue, fight the judge if they lost, and go and hide in their room at the end of the round. So I don't know. It felt almost more life and death for these people when they really should have a bit more perspective since they're in college already. Yeah. But I also tried the policy debate team for exactly 2 weeks. And the policy debate team was the one who tried spreading, and that was not for me. That is not.
Yeah, I tried the policy debate team at my college, and it was definitely not the move for me. So I don't have much experience debating in the US or in the way people debate in the US. But I think in terms of civil discourse in general, the biggest thing on my mind is, I think Loan referred to it earlier in the talk, is cancel culture. And this idea that, if you think a certain way, keep it to yourself, and, stay away from, me and the people that think like me and things like that. So I see a lot of that in Twitter and whatnot. And not to say that we don't have that back home. There's quite a bit of cancel culture back home, definitely. We're not shielded from that either. But it was definitely more pronounced when I first arrived here, either because I didn't pay attention when I was back home or because it's more pronounced here. I have no clue.
I think to kind of push back on what you're saying, I think people back home are a bit more guarded about what they say compared to people here. And so of course there's going to be a bit less cancel culture back home, because the culture in the US is like, people say the first thing that's on their mind, the moment it's on their mind, as loud as they can, or at least that's a lot of the people here in the Northeast. So so I think you can't really say it's a tit for tat comparison. Tit for tat comparison? I don't know what I'm saying. One for one comparison, you know what I mean.
Oh, thank you very kindly. That's it's very nice to hear about those experiences, having been someone who's been in the debate circuit, especially as someone who does Lincoln Douglas policy. Yeah, spreading is a lot. Thank you so much. So another question I actually had from Samuel, that is another one that's really interesting, kind of related to some of the conversation earlier. Do you think there's any similarities in debates about like anti-Black racism in the US that compares to sort of the domination structures that existed in Rwanda during the 1994 genocides, or even continue to exist today?
I'm not sure what the question is.
So do you think there's any similarities in kind of social dynamics based off of ethnic groups that exist in the US, and like that discussion over things like that, that also happens in Rwandan culture? I think the best way to rephrase it.
I correct. I'm not sure if the answer I'm going to give is true, but if he means that, are there like any similarities of like the division that is here and kind of what was in the country? Um, I think there is. I think the first thing, like the thinking of, you know, there's us and then there's them, that we can't coexist, if that makes sense, is the first thing that I think is similar, because even then among the Tutsis and Hutus, that's what um, the big tension was about, was that they believed that they could not live together, that, you know, one has to go, and which can be seen here too, that, you know, they feel like they can't coexist together, that it's not possible. Yeah, so that's one similarity that I see, the the us and them propaganda, the feeling that you're different, and because you're different then you can't live in the same world, which is absurd. And also the um, yeah, I feel like that's the main one, the division that is between people, it being different races, different gender, different sexuality, all of these, that makes it feel like you have to be separated, or you can't live in the same world, that it's you or the other, or that you are better than the other. Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, there's even, I think it's even worse than that. Like, there's not just similarities in the way that it manifests. There's not just similarities in like the way that the discrimination, the way the oppression manifests itself in the US and in Rwanda. There's similarities in the way that like people live their lives. Like the first thing that you take away from someone if you want to deprive them of the opportunity to advance is their ability to go to school properly, right? And you see the same thing in Rwanda as you see in the US, like huge disparities in access to education, huge disparities in outcomes after education, huge disparities in quality of schools in different neighborhoods, right? Like there's the same problem, yeah, like the police, the justice system treating people differently. So there's definitely similarities in the way that the oppression manifests itself. But then there's also similarities in the way that like the outcomes are coming out, right? Like in Rwanda, what they did is kind of what the Belgians did when they colonized Rwanda is they claimed that there were these fundamental differences between Hutus and Tutsis, and they claimed that our Tutsis came from it goes back far, but they claim basically the Tutsis came from Ethiopia and Hutus came from like Cameroon or came from like Central Africa, and that Tutsis are somehow these better people, right? And similarly and so they're claiming that there's fundamental differences in the humanness, or like in the kind of human that these two people are. And in the US, you see the exact same thing with the way that like black and white people are referring to each other. There's like the idea of that, like, yeah, like, I mean, literally white supremacy is that, right? The idea that there are fundamental differences between black and white people and that white people are better. So the way that it manifests itself is super similar. The way that the oppression exists is super similar. And hopefully people in the US can stop people from enacting, like, from being able to like act out these small pieces, the small steps, because genocide just has like 10 steps, right? I mean, each step has a million steps within it, but those small phases, as they accomplish each chunk one at a time, eventually that's when you reach a place where people start killing each other. And even if you don't get to the stage where people start killing each other, when people don't have opportunities to access equal things, that's also very bad.
Yeah, I think definitely like the racial tensions can be said to have like slight differences, and you can pinpoint stuff like, oh, it wasn't about race, it was about ethnicity and things like that. Or maybe let's say the US is let's say has a higher GDP or whatnot, or people have access to more things in general than people did in Rwanda and whatnot. Like there are subtle differences, but in all, there's once there's disparity, like deprivation of a certain of something that is considered a necessity or whatnot, whether that be access to justice, or as Brian mentioned, as Luan mentioned, education, or the right to free speech, or the right to feel safe, or those kinds of basic human rights and whatnot, there is a risk. And those are some things that we definitely did see that you could identify in Rwanda, but like you should also identify the responsibility that befalls upon people to speak out, and upon the government to not permit institutions to do these types of things freely, and to step in, which I think, at least from what I've seen, people are trying to be very, very outspoken about that in the US. And as we've mentioned, culturally, that was not a thing that would be done in Rwanda at the time. And that is one of the reasons why iDebate is doing its work and is working towards that, so there are these subtle differences, but definitely very similar root causes. Yes.
Also, something big that I've seen is the scapegoating. It's like blaming the others for your miseries. Like we can see how lately there's this Asian hate, and that has been big now because of the coronavirus and everything. How we're blaming somebody that has been leaving the country you live in probably as long as you have, or longer, who knows, and just because they're Asian you feel like you have to hate on them because of this virus that has nothing to do with them. And so that's something else that's very very toxic, the feel that you have to blame somebody for what happened to you, even if it's not their fault. Yeah, it's something else that I feel like is very big, and it also happened in our country, where the Hutus felt like the reason why they the reason why they're not prospering, I guess, is because of the Tutsis and things like that. Yeah.
I also think that, especially like with the Black Lives Matter movement, and especially with the George Floyd incident, the power of, let's say, protests to actually have like implications, I think is becoming more and more pronounced, given that like you have like mayors in certain areas making decisions that they wouldn't have made if, let's say, the protests weren't as big as they were, or the protests weren't as big as they were, people weren't as outspoken as they were on Twitter and on other social media and in general to the public. So I think that's also something to take note of. And I feel like people feel different about protests, because I feel like there was a lot of like, oh, do protests actually work, or is it just useless, or whatnot, thoughts along those lines. But especially these last few years, I feel this is slowly changing, which could have implications on people's feelings of speaking out.
Yeah, and I think one other thing, like, I think the big thing that I've noticed in the US that is different from what happened in Rwanda is, in Rwanda it was people. So in the US, people are becoming just fundamentally frustrated. Like, people are losing, especially like Black people under African Americans in the US are feeling like so frustrated that they go into streets and start protesting because they don't get these things that they feel are basic rights to live in the US. Whereas in Rwanda, the majority of people, yeah, so there wasn't this, what am I trying to say? I feel like in the US, people got compressed and then they exploded, and they exploded within the US. In Rwanda, people got compressed, eventually they ran away, and then a lot of people, it exploded from outside of Rwanda back into Rwanda, right? Like, people eventually invaded and removed the country. But in the US, it's kind of having a different kind of worse problem, where the people who are being oppressed in the US aren't going to leave, and they're going to stay, and they're going to continue getting more and more frustrated, to the point where the like basis of the country, like, I don't know, things fall apart. I don't know. Like, eventually people don't know what else they can possibly do. They can't leave. You know, a lot of people left. If they can't leave, they have to stay here. They can't continue being oppressed. Yeah. So it's almost, I don't think, I'm not saying it's going to I'm not saying anything about like it will manifest itself in this or that way, but it's a different problem. It's a problem that's internal, which is probably a worse problem in my mind.
Thank you all so much. That was a very nice nice discussion from that. I'm probably going to take one more from the audience and then just some quick conclusion stuff, so everyone tuning in can get off to bed with their respective time zones. The one I got one from Josh Kranek. He asked, genocide is a very touchy subject that can feel hard to approach. How do you go about promoting discourse surrounding subjects like that or other hard to approach ones while keeping all parties engaged and discussing in good faith?
I think a good thing to do would be acknowledging what you know and don't know beforehand. I think the worst thing you can do is claim something without necessarily knowing much about it, and then let's say hurt somebody through that, or make a blunder that you can't take back. So I'd say, like, acknowledging where you stand in terms of what you know or what you understand. And I think asking questions is a good way of starting discussion. Asking questions, open questions to, in general, to people, because of, let's say, because, as you said, you want to start discourse, or you want to know more about it, stay informed, so that for whatever reason it may be. I think things like these, inviting people, trying to talk to people, sharing the resources that you find with different people, and yeah, I think definitely that's first things that come to mind.
I think for me, it also goes back again to the safe space where we are allowing errors, where somebody can say something and they don't mean to be hurtful, and you have to just tell them this is what it actually is, and then they won't feel the need to not say, because they're afraid you're going to burst, and it's going to lead to something worse than if you would have kept quiet. So having that safe space where we're allowing errors, where we're allowing for somebody to have questions, to say whatever is in their mind, and then maybe you can correct them afterwards, without necessarily resorting to you thinking that they did it to make you feel bad or anything like that. So I think, yeah, a safe space where people know that they could say something and it won't be taken out of context or the wrong way, and they are going to be educated rather than insulted if they say something.
Yeah, and I think people just really need to feel like they're in a place where, like, I think the first thing, whenever you have an environment where people are going to have like some degree of confrontation about something which is kind of personal to them, it's kind of fluffy, but the thing that you really need is love. Like, you need each other to understand that you care about each other, and that when you're correcting each other, that the reason that you're saying, like, I don't know, like, maybe if I think Victor said something which I disagree with, I say like, hey, Victor, I think this thing you said was wrong. He understands, because we have such a long relationship, but the reason I would say something like that isn't to push him down. It's to like tell him, here's what I think is the truth, and then he'll tell me back what he thinks is the truth, and we have a lively discussion. But that only exists if we have like some kind of shared relationship or like some belief that we're both good people, right? Yeah, so I think these kinds of things, just kind of going back to the earlier thing, these kinds of things where people are able to engage with each other only exist when we have some shared feeling of like we're all Americans, we're all Rwandans, we're all humans, we're all friends, we're all people that we should care about. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. All right, I have one question to wrap us up. This is kind of tying into just the overall idea of the importance of debate and discourse in any society. If you were talking to someone and you were trying to convince them to engage in debate or discourse, be it as like an event like we do with like being on a policy team, or just be more involved with public discourse, what would be your go-to argument for why they should do that? What is the go-to reason for why you should get involved with discourse or debate?
I will say the opportunities and people that you meet there, because first things first, where I am right now is because of debate. Like I'm on a debate scholarship, and I believe that if I hadn't been part of a debate, then I probably wouldn't be here. So that's the first thing I would say, the opportunities you get. I was part of the US tour, and I think it wouldn't have happened in any other setting. And secondly, the people that you meet. My mom is the person that always tells me to be more outspoken and be nice to people, because the people that you meet are going to help you get somewhere. I feel like so many people say that, oh, I got here all by myself, but I just feel like it's not true. I feel like the people that you meet are the ones that get you far. Like right now, right here, there might be somebody that can be able to help me to get to whatever I want to get to tomorrow, it being tomorrow or in a few years. So I think that the thing that I would tell them is the opportunities and the people that you meet, you get there because you wouldn't get them any other place.
I'd also probably say like I think the best thing, for sure, the network and like the group of people that I met from iDebate, it was really, really awesome. But also the skills that we learned, like I can communicate. I think most of the people who I've met from iDebate are really, really good communicators, are really fine, able to stand up in front of people. And yeah, you'll be nervous for the first few minutes, but eventually kind of settled into it. You're comfortable talking. And I think for me, even though I've spent 4 years studying computer science, it's probably still the most useful skill that I have, being able to talk and deliver speeches and explain things to people, and argue about things cohesively and continue making sense. So I think my go-to argument would be, it's really cool because you get to meet people, but on top of that, you get to grow and be able to express your ideas really, really succinctly and really, really well. I say succinctly as I talk for like 3 minutes, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with the whole learning part of it. I think I've never learned as much as I have in my time at iDebate, because I was constantly told I was wrong. I think the way I think about it is I think being told I was wrong by so many people, whether it be whether it, like, I don't know, lit the fire of my beliefs in a certain thing, or completely changed my prepositions and whatnot. I think I've never felt more in tune with learning and just growing in general. So I think definitely if you're about learning and just about different things, and especially about yourself, I think, yeah, basically argue, fight with words.
And I think specifically because I think your question was specifically for public discourse. Debate, I think, at least in my mind, maybe this is because I did debate for so long in high school, is kind of the closest, and my roommates always disagree with this, so they're probably listening to what I'm saying, but I think it's the closest you can get to having people legitimately resolve arguments. Like, if we just say we should just have a vote, right? And everybody, we're a board of shareholders and we just have a vote, then yeah, I guess we have decisions being made, but then it's just the tyranny of the people who have the most shares, right? But with debate, you have the opportunity to have, I think, even debate as a tool for managing businesses and managing countries would probably be a good idea, because you have a limited amount of time to say what you want to say, and you have an explicit amount of time with which you want to make that decision. So we say we have 7 days with which we want to make that decision. I think having debates helps people make decisions and forces them to make decisions pretty quickly. So yeah, I think it's useful for public discourse because it forces people to make final decisions about things and make decisions which people at least understand, even if they don't agree with.
And just to add on quickly, it is also a space where you have the opportunity to argue about a cause that you believe in, and you will have people paying attention to you. Yeah.
Sorry. And I also think we often, okay, in general, I feel like people will undervalue the power of being able to communicate your ideas in comparison to powers like money or let's say a high position and whatnot. But the power of being able to explicitly say what you mean in a cohesive way, in an understandable way, is basically the way you're able to do anything in the world, in whatever field you're thinking of going into, or whatever you may think of. Communication is literally how we interact as people. And I think deepening that in any way or form is just beneficial all throughout. Yeah.
Thank you all so much. This has been a fantastic and provocative conversation. If I could get I suppose, a virtual round of applause for these people joining us. It is such a fine opportunity to have discussions like this and show the importance of debate. Yeah, thank you guys so much for joining us. If anyone is interested in some of the resources that were shared for learning more about the events like that, please reach out to us. And Marshall, do you think it's hard to catalog some of those for people who are interested?
Oh, no, definitely. As noticed in the top left, this whole meeting was being recorded. I believe that iDebate Rwanda has plans to release this as a YouTube video as part of their series, their global debate series, in the place of an actual physical tour that they would be taking this year. So the chat log would be available for that. These could also be included in the description of such a video. So if you're interested, this is a good segue into following iDebate via their social media channels. I know that the debate union, in our posts leading up to this event, we had a couple shout outs and sharing their stories onto our page and finding them there. That would be an easy way to connect, but also finding them on YouTube for the resources mentioned would also be a good reason for the connection.
So with that, thank you all so much for joining us, both our guests from iDebate Rwanda, as well as anyone able to tune in. And I hope everyone here has a lovely rest of their evening.
Yeah, any comments from our participants on the panel, either the coaches involved?
On my side, I would just say thank you to everyone. I enjoyed listening to the discussion, and thank you for the invitation. And I mean, we did what we could with the online event, and I'm hoping that the next time we meet, we'll be meeting up in physical space, and we'll be able to interact even more. But thank you all very much for a great event.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. I think having these discussions about what happened in Rwanda, about debate and its power, is really, really useful. So I think it's a good thing that we have the opportunity to come and talk about these things. Yeah, and I would love to have an opportunity where you guys eventually maybe tell us some interesting stories about like what has happened